Never forget. Never forget. Never forget. Hi everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Rate Sports History. This episode, I do want to focus on the NFL, a little bit of college football, but my main thrust is about the Rookies of the Year and some fun with this as I go through the history of the Rookie of the Year, probably American mostly. I will definitely highlight some National League, but I'd like to take it from a standpoint of, wow, if the writers knew what they knew today about, let's say, all things metrics and all things war, my special problem with war has been mentioned several times on the episodes, but would they have again voted for who eventually won the Rookie of the Year? And Rookie of the Year has always fascinated me. It's one of those things that that inspired me to really follow baseball, because I always thought it was pretty cool that, hey, your first year up, you can be really recognized as a great player. And after that, who knows what happens? And of course, then with the Rookie of the Year, I remember my brother always telling me about, well, then they have the sophomore jinx. Many of them don't succeed their sophomore year because, let's say, the league knows of their hitting behaviors or hitting habits or pitching habits, etc., and then they kind of struggle. Not all of them, but some of them do. And some of them don't have as good a freshman year, or some of them don't have a good sophomore year or years after that as they did a freshman or rookie year in the league. So it's a little bit of fun that way. And of course, I have to do this. I have to do a cartoon on college football. It was a wacky week in college football. So I'll just start it off, and then we'll have some fun with the baseball. Maybe I'll have baby formula. The government will have paid off my college loans by then. I'll be spending $12 a gallon before Notre Dame joins a conference for football. Now, originally, I had this cartoon like this, except I've added something as well. 2022 season, 0-2 start. Nobody wants you. Indeed, the Fighting Irish are battling back from an 0-2 start, losing yesterday in a huge upset to Marshall University. But that wasn't the only big upset in college football. Appalachian State went down to College Station and defeated Texas A&M by 3 points, holding off the Aggies with just great play. First of all, I have to salute both teams. I am an Irish fan, but our season is done. It'll take a miracle for the Irish to even get back to a New Year's Day bowl, one of the secondary New Year's Day bowls. And it will take miracles of all these great teams in the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12 losing potentially badly. Anybody who saw Washington State also upset Wisconsin, but that's not as big a deal as the Marshall and Appalachian State. And for Notre Dame, their season is done. As I've always stated, and I do usually a cartoon on this once a year, especially, when the Irish signed that deal with NBC, they had just won in 1988, of course, the national championship, beat in the Fiesta Bowl, West Virginia, to finish undefeated. Since then, they really have only sniffed national championship possibilities twice. And in both instances, they were dismantled, destroyed, demolished, desecrated by both Alabama and Clemson. So they really haven't sniffed anything in the 30 some odd years since they signed the deal with the Peacock. And that's why I call it the curse of the Peacock. I'm wondering if it's time to leave NBC and end the curse, because it's getting right up there with the GOAT with the Chicago Cubs, to say the least. But Notre Dame, I love their first year coach, Coach Freeman. If you watch the game, and I didn't see all four quarters. I only saw the fourth quarter of the Notre Dame Marshall game. Notre Dame looked outplayed. They looked really, the talent seemed to be on the side of Marshall, the Thundering Herd, rather than the Fighting Irish. And the big plays were always made by Marshall. And indeed, I thought that Notre Dame seemed to lack any kind of spirit, and no knock against the quarterback, but he didn't seem to have the charisma of the Montanas, the Theismanns, the Tony Rices that I remember growing up as a boy, and then later on in my 20s and 30s watching some of the great Notre Dame quarterbacks. Notre Dame is in trouble, though, right now. And they're in the midst of probably negotiating a new contract with NBC with all these mega conferences. And I know the mega conferences have probably extended invites to Notre Dame and they refuse. But the way things are going for Notre Dame and its Subway fans, they may never sniff another national title with the way things are going. And the offensive line, unfortunately, which has been touted as the best, probably the best ever at Notre Dame, and one of the best, if not the best, in the college landscape, they have not played well. They haven't really given time for the quarterback, and their running game is flat. So Notre Dame has a lot of work to do. Even if they go on a winning streak where they're unbeaten the rest of the way, and let's say they finish 10-2, I don't even see them making a New Year's Day bowl. And that would include beating USC over the Thanksgiving Day holidays in LA, something that they have not really done with any kind of regularity. In fact, right now, I guess the Irish have to hope for Ohio State continuing to win, maybe Marshall showing legitimacy as a kind of like a Boise State or a Cincinnati type of thing, and hope that those two continue to win and then beat USC, have them continue to win as well. And then say, well, we lost 2 early season games. Both of those teams are in the bowl championship series. USC, we knocked out of the bowl championship series. I just don't see it, though. I mean, that's a miracle. And what else they're going to need is for all the other big teams to lose, let's say, games they should win, where you say, wow, you should have won that game, and you got upset. And believe me, Texas A&M was a huge upset. Appalachian State did a nice job. Really, it's almost becoming Appalachian State the week before, 2 weeks before, lost by a point to North Carolina in a wild game that you thought was a basketball score, 63-62. And they actually had a chance to win that game if they had made their 2-point conversion. It's pretty amazing what these smaller schools can do. But as these mega conferences build, they are going to be left in the dust. And I wonder if Notre Dame decides not to join, will they be left in the dust? And you can say all you want about the Subway fans and the NBC contract and all the rest of it, but they indeed want to be a player, and they may be forced into full-time conference membership. Where that falls, who knows? But these mega conferences are really putting pressure on the schools that are going to be left out. And as I've stated, you may just have a professional league of these mega conferences. They'll probably have 4 when the dust, when the dust settles. And then anybody who's not in one of those is probably going to be playing in a tier 2 type division. And then, of course, you have the others, the Ivy Leagues. And I got to be honest, nobody cares about the Ivy Leagues when it comes to college football, except maybe the Ivy conferences. They're no player. They're not a player at all in big-time athletics. But this is a sign of the times. Notre Dame is in, I would say, probably one of the most significant college football, and lack of a better word, I'm going to call it franchises, is probably because they are in limbo of what to do or where they want to go. And you could call it arrogance on the part of administration by not signing with a conference, or you could call it saying that they just want to continue with their independence, but and be quote unquote, I guess, rebellious in a good way. But they're in trouble. I'm sorry, they're in trouble, and they can make gobs of money from NBC, but it's not going to guarantee. And even with the expansion of 12, and I had a debate with a buddy of mine. We had fun debating all this. And I understand where he's coming from when he says, well, Notre Dame, with the expansion of 12 teams, they can remain an independent because they'll always take Notre Dame as, even if it's an afterthought 12th team in that spot. I kind of disagree, because if you have 4 mega conferences, they're each going to have at least 2, potentially 3 teams that are good. And I don't know whether a 10-0 Notre Dame team, I'm just taking numbers, is going to figure to be a better team than, let's say, a 9-1 Georgia, which lost to Alabama, which was 10-0. And the 10 wins that Notre Dame has accumulated are coming against, let's say, a 5-5 Purdue or a 3-7 Northwestern, or in a bad year, 7-3 SC. And then, of course, Navy, Air Force, and maybe they play Army. I don't see the committee saying to Notre Dame, you're good enough to play as, let's say, a wild card team or a 12th seed in this whole thing to get to play, when you might be leaving out from these mega conferences in Oregon, in Oklahoma State, I don't know, maybe in LSU, which has 2 losses in one of these conferences, and now you're taking them over Notre Dame, even though, let's say, the rating system has LSU. I just don't see it, even with all the TV. I just don't see it. So I really think Notre Dame's in for a heap of trouble once, as I said, the dust has settled. That being said, it was a great weekend. If you're a fan of upsets, you had Washington State over Wisconsin. They beat them in Camp Randall, 17-14. I know that Washington State struggled last year, went to the Sun Bowl. They won quite a few games at the end of the year. I think they won 6 of their last 8 or 6 of their last 9, which isn't bad. Now they won that game. Alabama just squeaked by Texas 20-19. Although, I have to be honest, even if Texas had beaten Alabama, they're still big-time programs with heavy, great, rich football traditions. I don't see that as big an upset, although it would have been, as obviously Appalachian State over TA&M or Marshall over Notre Dame. Then it was a good game yesterday between Tennessee and Pitt. I like that they call it the Johnny Majors tournament or bowl game or whatever. I think that's great. And I want them to keep that alive. It was a good game, very physical. Of course, Pitt loses in an OT. And then where I was coming from, even the Army game against UTSA, good team, solid team, could give, they gave Houston all that they were, lost in overtime the week before. Now they're playing in a second overtime, and they defeated the Black Knights of the Hudson in overtime. In a game that went back and forth, actually Army had a 2-touchdown lead. You got UTSA stormed back. Then Army, to take a lead, scored 3 unanswered touchdowns. Then Army tied it. And then, of course, they lost it in overtime. Good games all around. And just a fun, wild weekend in college football. I hope, actually, that these upsets continue, because it just adds so much flavor to college football, which is one of my favorite followings. I've just loved college football since I was 8 years old. Follow Notre Dame, my dad and my brothers. I just always loved it. Always thought it was just so much better than the NFL. But that's me. All right, now let's segue to some fun with the Rookies of the Year. Now look, I use Baseball Reference here. They have an outstanding website. And I guess what I'm trying to do is this. I just want to look through the past about the winners and losers of the Rookies of the Year and see whether I'm not making a complaint against the writers, but I want to see how well the writers actually fashioned this. I will tell you this. I was amazed at how many unanimous selections there were for Rookie of the Year. As a kid, I do remember that Fisk was a unanimous selection. I thought that would hold off and figured he was the only unanimous selection, but there have been a plethora of them. Well, I'll mention a couple of them right now if I can get on a website here. But I didn't know this. Here are some of the players that were actually unanimous Rookies of the Year. In 97, I didn't know this. Scott Rowland and Nomar Garciaparra were both winners in the same year. Both were unanimous selections. In 93, Mike Piazza, Hall of Famer, and Tim Salmon, good player, both from California teams, they were both unanimous selections. Benito Santiago and Mark McGwire, San Diego and Oakland, respectively, were both unanimous selections. So those are just some of the highlights. Now, what I'd like to do is this. Go back from the very beginning. You remember that they only gave one award for the first 2 years. Interestingly enough, Jackie Robinson was the first winner, and Alvin Dark was the 1948 winner. Played for the Boston Braves way back when. Dark had a Dark had a higher WAR than Jackie Robinson, 4.5 to 4.1 to win that. I'm just going through a whole list. I'm going to mention 1950. Well, here's the other thing that really made me think about this. And everyone knows kind of my fascination and frustration with WAR. That's wins above replacement. And it is, to me, kind of a complex formula. I can't explain it in one sitting, nor do I want to. But I know that for many writers, many pundits, and many baseball analysts, it seems to be many times a be-all and end-all when they are grading players or trying to put players in context of their worth or their value on a team. And my problem with the WAR is this. I have mentioned about Marcus Semien, specifically with Oakland and Toronto, almost identical. When I say almost, I mean identical stats, except for maybe one more home run here, 3 fewer RBIs here, maybe 4 points between the batting average. And yet there was a huge gap in the WAR where you would say, all right, he basically had identical seasons. His WAR should be, let's say, 5 for both. And yet it was, let's say, 7.5 for one and 4.8 for the other. And you start to say, well, wait a minute, maybe the difference is in their defense. And you find out that the year in which he has a lower WAR, his defense was regarded higher with the winning of a Gold Glove or a higher defensive rating. So it still boggles my mind. Probably still my limited mathematical expertise is being shown here to all. So it is kind of frustrating. And so I just figure I'd just have some fun. And really what I would propose is this. Maybe here's the whole objective. Would the writers, knowing what they do now with WAR or with the new elements and metrics, would they still vote their same guy, Rookie of the Year, or maybe I might even go to MVP here, or would they change their vote in deference to the higher WAR rating for several of these players? Now, one of the guys I wanted to do, and I will show you this, 1950, but friends of the family, also a big baseball fan, sent me these old newspapers, and it's kind of cool because I use this as maybe a segue to the Rookie of the Year. And I just want to do 1950 here first. I'm going to go in order. And here is a magazine that the Post had when the Yankees turned 100 years old, or 100th anniversary, 1903 to 2003. This is already 19 years ago. Here's Whitey gracing the cover of this New York Post magazine. Others on the Post articles, they did Ruth, they did Mantle, of course they did Jeter. You can see David Cohn in the middle with the perfect game that he threw. Toast of the Town winning the 96 or the Subway Series. Of course, there's Mariano in the bottom. The stadium itself. And then what many Yankee haters hate saying, Yankee dynasties. And then what's even worse is the dream team for the Yankees. The Yankees probably have more Hall of Famers at one position than most teams if you took their entire list or roster of players throughout their franchise. I can tell you this, the Yankees had numerous great catchers with Dickey and Berra highlighting them. And, of course, you had good players in Elston Howard and Munson. I think 3 of the 4 I've named were all MVPs. I mean, that's how deep the Yankee bench goes. That's the beauty of having a dynasty, is that one great player is replaced by a future great player. Mantle replaces DiMaggio in center field. And, of course, good player Bernie Williams is one of the focuses or one of the core 4 players of the Yankee great teams of the late 90s and early 2000s with that core 4 of Jeter, Hall of Famer, Bernie Williams, Mariano, the greatest relief pitcher in all of baseballdom. And, of course, Andy Pettitte and George Posada. You can select your core 4 there. Posada, many pure Yankee fans wanted because Pettitte left. Shout out to a buddy of mine who never forgave Pettitte for leaving, going to the Astros. But that being said, these are great little magazines, and I just wanted to bring up, here is, and I guess this is my problem from the very beginning. Now, Whitey Ford was a Hall of Fame pitcher, great pitcher. His stats do not really indicate his worth. And I remember reading, probably it was Bill James, about Casey Stengel and using Ford always against the best pitcher on the other team. Really sacrificing the greatness of Ford. Kind of, you probably wouldn't do that today. And Ford would go out and perform like the great pitcher that he was. He probably could have won more games had he pitched maybe against quote-unquote tomato can pitchers. That being said, in 1950, Ford went 9-1 with the Yankees in a call-up and finished second in the Rookie of the Year. He lost to Walt Dropo. Or like I used to say, I used to call him Walt Dropo because I knew he wasn't a good defensive player. So I call him drop a lot of balls. But it was really his signature season with the Red Sox. It's the only year he makes the All-Star game. What I was fascinated by when I was doing my study is how many of these Rookie of the Years failed to make an All-Star team in their career, let alone in their All-Star season. It was more than I ever suspected. But Dropo only made one All-Star team, and that was the 50 Red Sox. He was 34, 144, and 322. And for all those who maybe, one or two of you who might just have tuned in, and right before you tune out, you got to realize when I do those numbers with baseball, it's home runs, RBIs, and batting average. The traditional 3 numbers that we used to measure players on before we got into all the metrics. But they are a pretty good indication of a player's abilities. 34 home runs, we know. He's got power, 144 RBIs. He's got to be hitting with men on base, number 1. And number 2, probably hitting in the clutch. And, of course, a good batting average. I know that the metrics guys poo-poo the batting average, but as I've been trying to state, it's more important, and there is a legitimate value on the batting average. All right? You got to get on base. Ask the Yankees lately about that. Anyway, he finished, Dropo was the Rookie of the Year that year. He actually finished with a 2.6 WAR. And now I'm learning. I gotta be. I am so shout outs. I've done this before to Baseball Reference and Baseball Almanac. The really, for someone who's very versed with the computer, they make everything so easy to investigate, research, and data mine. For me, it's even a help. Each time I go on this site, I learn so much about all the information they really have, to the point where I don't even need baseball books, even though I like to have them in front of me and highlight them and all the rest of it. It's good to have them at your disposal. Dropo had a 2.6 WAR. Whitey Ford was 2.5. Now, Whitey was 9-1 with a 2.81 ERA. He started 12 games that year, saved one, threw 112 innings. And he only had, I don't have games played, all right? Those two guys having marvelous seasons. Now, Ford goes on to win the World Series, of course. They beat the Whiz Kids in 1950. Dropo, of course, playing for a second division team in the Red Sox. I think they finished 10 games under 500. Nevertheless, their WAR is less, all right, than Chico Carrasquel, who finished third in the voting, and his WAR was 2.7. Now, Carrasquel hit 4 homers, 46 RBIs, hit a solid 282, drew 66 walks, so he had an on-base percentage of 368. Not bad. White Sox, of course, do finish under 500. He is a shortstop and a good defensive shortstop. All right. And I'm just using the numbers that they have tried to compile and register here. But over his career, a very good shortstop. I wouldn't put him in Apariccio's, nor would I put him in Belanger's. So I have to be honest with you. Not that I'm not ever, but his WAR is higher than Ford's. And I'm trying to articulate this the right way. Are you telling me then that finding another shortstop with Carrasquel's capabilities that year in 1950 was harder to find than finding a Hall of Famer who won 9 of 10 decisions with a save for a team that goes on and wins the World Series? Or finding a first baseman who had hit 30 homers, lead the league in RBIs with 144, and hit a robust 322. So you're telling me that a shortstop at 282, playing a great shortstop, is, because that's what you're saying, wins above replacement, that he's actually harder to find than a future Hall of Fame pitcher. I would love to ask the writers today whether they would have voted Carrasquel as the Rookie of the Year. So you see where I'm going with this, and this is where I'm having fun. And to be honest with you, this is the third time I'm trying to do the show, only because I had some technical glitches, and I wanted to have a smooth transition here as I am right now. Okay. I wanted to do, all right, so we'll go up. 1951, Mickey Mantle comes into the league, but he doesn't win the Rookie of the Year. Willie Mays wins it in the National League. Ready for this? Mays, 20 homers, 68 RBIs, 7 steals, hits 274. He has a slugging of 472 and an on-base percentage of 356. Now, this is 1951. Gil McDougall hits 306, has an on-base percentage of 396, slugging 488. All right. Home runs 14, RBI 63, and steals 14. Here's where I have problems with the WAR. Mays helps the Giants to the pennant. Right? He's involved in that great pennant comeback against the Dodgers. Mays has a 3.9 WAR. Gil McDougall's was 4.5 that year. Now, in the voting, National League, ready? Here's Willie Mays. I hope I find it here. Second place, I didn't know this, was Boston's Chet Nichols. Boston's Chet Nichols, who was 11-8 and led the league in ERA with a 2.88 ERA. And third was one of my mother-in-law's favorite players, Clem Levine, because he's a Dodger. 2.20 ERA, 5-1, no saves as a rookie, and he had a 1.8 WAR. Now, of course, I don't think anybody has a problem with Mays winning the Rookie of the Year. First of all, he has the highest WAR of the three, is a big-time defensive insert into the Giants' defense. I don't think anybody has a problem. Let's face it, he's a Hall of Famer. The other two, no. Gil McDougall had a 4.5 WAR that year. Amazing. Had a 306 batting average, 274. Now, my whole point is this. You're telling me, and it doesn't really matter, but that he's 0.6 points higher in WAR. You're telling me that the Yankees couldn't find another infielder who produced at this rate, and that Willie Mays was 3.9, 0.6 below him with the great. I don't know. I'm really struggling to understand the WAR. All right, I just figured I'd bring that up. Two different leagues, I understand it. Two different situations, I get it. Ready for this? I'm going to go to. I'm moving up here. The first time. Here's a good trivia question. The first time the Rookie of the Year selected two future Hall of Famers. I believe it's only happened 3 times. The first time it happened was, ready? 1956. I'll let that sink in. 1956, who came in to the league? Well, in the American League, and this is kind of laughable because he basically replaces Chico Carrasquel as the shortstop for the White Sox. It's Louis Aparicio. In the National League, one of my favorite players, Frank Robinson of the Cincinnati Reds. Robinson has the highest WAR of any rookie in the selection history to that point. His was 6.5. It was higher than Mays. It was higher than Herb Score the year before at 5.3. And it was higher than, obviously, Gil McDougall at 4.5 or Alvin Dark, who had a 4.5. Can you imagine? Here's the other thing. I'm just going back on passing. Alvin Dark is the winner in 1948. His WAR is 4.5 with 3 homers, 48 RBIs, and a 322 batting average. Willie Mays, 274. I thought batting average didn't matter. 20 homers, 68 RBIs. On-base percentage is 3 points higher for Mays. And slugging, of course, 472. This is what I don't understand about the WAR. It seems to fluctuate between the years. Anyway, ready for this? I don't think there's a player, at least with Rookie of the Year, who would top Robinson with the 6.5. So you can actually argue that the writers did a nice job. In fact, Robinson was unanimous. Nobody got a first place vote other than Robinson, who finished the league, leading the league in runs with 122, 38 home runs. At that time, that was a rookie record, 83 RBIs, and a 290 batting average. Aparicio had a 1.5 WAR. 3 homers, 56 RBIs, 21 steals, 266 average. I would almost say he has the same stats as Carrasquel, and yet his is almost it's 1.5. It's almost half Carrasquel's. Second place, ready for this? Rocky Colavito had a 2.4 WAR, 21 homers, 65 RBIs, 276. Now, got news. Would the writers change their vote knowing the WAR as they do today? or would they have kept it as Aparicio, Hall of Famer, Colavito, kind of on the cusp? Let's go to another one. Oh, here's one of the worst wars of all time. Albee Pearson, who won it for the Washington Senators. He hit 275, 3 homers, 33 RBIs. All right. He defeated. This is when, sometimes that there's not great rookies, but let's just see. I'm almost sure, and I'm not looking, this is the first time I'm looking, he has a 0.8 WAR, 0.8 WAR. The voting in 58. Ready for this? Gary Bell finished third in the voting in 1958. He had a 2.9 WAR for the Indians. He went 12-10 with a 3.31 ERA. Even Ryan Duran, who I've just did an essay about because I'm working on a book. Ryan Duran was 6-4, 2.02 ERA. He had 19 saves. All right, for the 58 Yankees, who would go on to win the pennant and the World Series. And yet, Albee Pearson, with 3 homers, 33 RBIs, wins the Rookie of the Year. Again, I ask, would they have voted those two players ahead of Albee Pearson, knowing what they know now? Cepeda, again, was unanimous. Orlando Cepeda won the 58 Rookie of the Year unanimously. Here, for the National League, I got to say this. This is the only guy with a 0 WAR. Although I do think he was probably a better player, or would have been a better player. Unfortunately, had he not been killed in a plane crash, and that was Ken Hobbs. Now, there were only 2 people who were selected that year in the National League who garnered the votes. Ken Hobbs, 5 homers, 49 RBIs, 260 batting average, playing for the Cubs. Who finished second that year was Don Clendenin. Ready for this? 7 homers, 28 RBIs, 302 batting average. The problem is, Ken Hobbs' stats were over 160 games. Clendenin did his in only 80 games. So let's just say this, for sake of talking about it. We doubled all of Clendenin, said he played in 160 games. It would have been 1456, 32 steals, even though he got with 52 walks and a 302 batting average. I wonder if the writers still would have voted Ken Hobbs. And I really do believe this. I know that Hobbs, I think he finished with a negative WAR. I think he was probably a better player than the WAR indicated. That if he had a few more years, that if he wasn't unfortunately killed in a plane crash, he would have been second baseman with maybe Kessinger. You'd have Williams in the outfield, Santo at third. Eventually, you would have had Jenkins on the mound with Ernie Banks at first. And maybe they don't trade Brock in 64. Who knows? All right. But he's the lowest WAR to ever win the Rookie of the Year. Now, I'm just going through some of these. Here's a fascinating one, okay? And this is what I'm talking about. I'm going to measure by year. Ready for this? Dick Allen was 8.8 and the Rookie of the Year in 1964. 29 home runs, 91 RBIs. Here's Cepeda. He's 25-96 and he hit 312. Almost identical. Would you not say almost identical? Cepeda played first base in the outfield. Not a bad first baseman. Not a great one. Doesn't have great range. Not a very good outfielder. And that was the problem with the Giants back then. They had 2 first basemen / outfielders, and McCovey and Cepeda really couldn't find room for either. All right? Just to give you an idea, Allen was a third baseman, did boot a lot of balls, etc. in 64. I'm not knocking him for that. I think it was his first year. I don't even think he played all that much in the minor leagues, third base. But here's where I have a problem. Cepeda has a 3 WAR in 1958 Allen has an 8.8. Different years, different positions. I get it. And I can understand the WAR being this way. In 64, could you have found a better third baseman than Dick Allen for the Phillies? 8.8 WAR. That's an amazing WAR. And he had a terrific season. But here is almost identical the stats, even defensively, and yet it is almost 3 times as high as Orlando Cepeda. And Cepeda goes on to be elected to the Hall of Fame. Dick Allen is still waiting, and I'm hoping to get in. So it's just fascinating stuff that I found with the Rookie of the Year and the WAR. And the whole premise is, knowing what some of these writers know now, would they vote the same way in the American League and National League Rookie of the Year selections? This is Will O'Toole thanking you again for joining. And remember, never forget 9/11. See you all next week with another episode. Bye now.